Hi, welcome. Enjoy the content, subscribe, and turn on notifications.
Jason always believed he knew his wife better than anyone else. 15 years of marriage seemed to have built a solid foundation made of trust, shared laughter, and moments he treasured in his memory. Melissa was his partner, his best friend, the mother of his daughter Lily, or at least that's what he thought until that ordinary Tuesday in November, when everything collapsed in a matter of minutes. Jason had come home from work around 6 p.m., as he always did. He worked as an operations manager for a logistics company in Portland, Oregon, and his routine was predictable. Melissa was waiting for him in the living room, sitting on the couch with her hands clasped together, her eyes fixed on the floor. He immediately sensed something was wrong. She didn't smile when he walked in, didn't ask how his day had been. She just lifted her face and said in a trembling voice, "We need to talk." Jason felt a tightness in his chest but tried to stay calm. "What's going on?" he asked, dropping his bag by the door. Melissa gestured for him to sit down. "It's about Lily," she said, her voice breaking. Jason sat down slowly, his heart beginning to race. "Is she okay? Did something happen at school?" Melissa shook her head, took a deep breath, and let out the words that would change everything. "I need to tell you something about our daughter. She's not your biological child." The silence that followed was deafening. Jason stared at her, trying to process what he'd just heard, but the words didn't seem to make sense. "What do you mean she's not my daughter?" he asked, his voice colder than he intended. Melissa started crying, tears streaming down her face as she explained between sobs that Lily was the result of an affair she'd had early in their marriage with Brad, a high school ex who'd reappeared in her life 15 years ago. "I made a terrible mistake," Melissa said, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "It happened in our first year of marriage. I was confused, Brad showed up out of nowhere, and I couldn't resist. When I found out I was pregnant, I wasn't sure who the father was, but Brad disappeared again, and I chose to believe it was you. I wanted to believe that." Jason felt the ground give way beneath him. The room spun, and he had to place his hands on his knees to keep from collapsing. 15 years. 15 years of raising, loving, and investing everything in a child he thought was his. "Why are you telling me this now?" Jason managed to ask, his voice hoarse. Melissa looked away. "Because Brad came back. He found me on social media a few months ago and started blackmailing me. He wants to meet Lily, wants to be part of her life. He said if I don't tell you the truth, he'll show up himself and tell you." Jason closed his eyes, trying to control the anger starting to boil inside him. "A few months? You've been talking to this guy for months and didn't tell me anything?" Melissa nodded, now crying harder. "I was scared, Jason. Scared of losing you, of losing everything we've built. But he won't leave me alone. He says he has a right to know, that Lily deserves to know who her real father is." Jason stood up abruptly and walked to the window, putting distance between them. His mind raced, processing every detail, every implication of the bomb that had just exploded in his life. Then he heard it. Melissa's phone was on the coffee table and started vibrating insistently. Once, twice, 3 times in a row, messages coming in. Jason looked at the device, then at Melissa, who visibly tensed. "Is it him?" Jason asked. She didn't answer, but her expression said it all. Something clicked inside Jason, a gut feeling that there was more to this story than she was letting on. He moved quickly, grabbing the phone before Melissa could react. She cried out, "No," but it was too late. The screen was unlocked, and Brad's messages were right there, open for anyone to see. Jason started reading and felt his blood run cold. These weren't blackmail messages. They were messages of love, intimacy, and complicity. "Can't wait for us to finally be together for real, babe. Just a few more days and Jason will be out of the way." Another message read, "He really bought that Lily isn't his? You're brilliant. Now we just let him walk away from her, and we'll build our family. Jason kept scrolling, each message like a stab to the chest. There were photos of them together, travel plans, conversations about how they'd share their lives once Jason voluntarily stepped aside. They laughed about how he'd never suspected a thing in 15 years, how easy it was to manipulate him. A message from Brad 2 days earlier said, "The best part is he'll walk away from Lily thinking it's the right thing to do. We won't even have to fight for custody." Jason slowly turned to Melissa, who was now standing, pale as a sheet. "You made all this up," he said, his voice low but filled with restrained fury. "Lily is my daughter, and you invented this story to make me give up on her." Melissa tried to deny it, shaking her head frantically, but no words came out. "You and this Brad are together. You planned this. You were going to make me believe I wasn't her father so I'd leave heartbroken, abandon my daughter, and you two could have everything." "Jason, it's not like that," Melissa began, but he cut her off, holding up the phone. "It's all here, Melissa. Every lie, every sick plan. You two laughing at me, planning your happy future at my expense, and at the expense of my daughter." He took a step toward her, his eyes locked on hers. "You were going to use paternity as a weapon. You were going to make me believe I'd spent 15 years raising another man's child just so I'd walk away voluntarily, so you wouldn't have to fight for custody in the divorce. What kind of person does that?" Melissa collapsed onto the couch, sobbing, but Jason didn't feel an ounce of pity. He grabbed his own phone and started taking pictures of every message on her screen. "What are you doing?" she asked through tears. "Documenting everything," Jason replied coldly. "Every lie, every manipulation. You think I'm just going to let you get away with this?" He continued photographing methodically, making sure he captured every incriminating conversation. When he was done, Jason tossed her phone onto the couch and headed to the bedroom. Melissa followed him, pleading, "Please, we can talk this through. I made a mistake, but we can fix it." Jason laughed, but it was a bitter, humorless sound. "Fix it? You schemed to destroy my relationship with my daughter. You were going to make me believe the last 15 years of my life were a lie. And you think that's fixable?" He grabbed a suitcase and started throwing clothes into it. "I'm going to a hotel tonight. First thing tomorrow morning, I'm getting a DNA test. And when I prove Lily is my daughter, I'm suing you for everything you've got." Melissa grabbed his arm desperately. "You can't do that. Think of Lily, of what this will do to her." Jason pulled away sharply. "I think about Lily every single day. That's exactly why I'm going to get her out of the hands of a mother who was willing to use her as a pawn in some sick game." He finished packing and left the bedroom. In the hallway, he stopped at Lily's door. The girl was asleep, oblivious to the chaos exploding in her parents' lives. Jason quietly entered, knelt beside the bed, and kissed his daughter's forehead. "I'll protect you," he whispered. "I promise." When he left the room, Melissa was in the living room, her face swollen from crying. "Jason, please," she started, but he walked right past her without looking. At the door, he turned one last time. "Oh, and Melissa? I recorded everything. From the moment you dropped that bomb about Lily not being my daughter until now. Every word, every admission. My phone was recording in my pocket the whole time." The color drained from Melissa's face. You can't do that." Jason smiled, but it was a cold smile. "I just did. And I'll use it in court. You and Brad thought of everything, except that I might be smarter than you." He slammed the door behind him. In the car, Jason drove to the nearest hotel, checked in, and went straight to his room. He sat on the bed and finally let the reality of what had happened hit him. But there was no time to give in to grief. He grabbed his laptop and started researching family law attorneys. He sent emails to 3 different firms, attaching copies of the photos he'd taken of the messages and a summary of what had happened. The next morning at 8 o'clock sharp, Jason was at the door of a clinic that specialized in DNA testing. He'd called as soon as they opened and secured an emergency appointment. The receptionist explained that results usually took 2 to 3 business days, but Jason paid extra for express service, results in 72 hours. He left the clinic and went straight to the office of one of the lawyers who'd responded to his email. The lawyer, a middle-aged man named Richard Torres, listened to the whole story carefully, taking notes. When Jason finished and showed him the photos of the messages, Richard nodded gravely. This is attempted parental alienation and emotional manipulation. You've got a very strong case. Once the DNA results come back, we'll file for emergency custody and initiate divorce proceedings with cause. Jason felt a weight lift off his shoulders. Finally, someone was on his side. The next 3 days were the longest of Jason's life. He stayed at the hotel, went to work, tried to keep things normal, but his mind kept circling back to Lily and what Melissa might be saying to her. He'd sent her a message saying he wouldn't make contact until he had the test results and that she shouldn't say anything to Lily until they spoke. Melissa replied with desperate messages, begging to talk, saying she'd made a terrible mistake, but Jason ignored them all. On the afternoon of the 3rd day, the results arrived by email. Jason opened it with trembling hands. He read the line that mattered: probability of paternity, 99.99%. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath. Lily was his daughter. She always had been. Melissa's lie had no basis in reality, it was pure malice, pure manipulation. Jason immediately forwarded the results to Richard, who replied within minutes, "Perfect. We're going to court tomorrow morning." The process moved quickly because Richard had prepared everything in advance. They filed for emergency custody, attaching the DNA test, recordings of Melissa's confessions, photos of the messages between her and Brad, and Jason's detailed statement about what had happened that Tuesday. The judge reviewing the case was a woman in her 50s named Judge Sandra Morrison, known for her zero-tolerance stance in cases involving the manipulation of minors. The preliminary hearing took place a week later. Melissa arrived with a defense attorney, visibly nervous. Brad wasn't present, but he'd been notified as an interested party due to the messages. Judge Morrison read all the documents carefully, and her expression grew graver with each page. When she finished, she looked directly at Melissa. "Ma'am, can you explain what led you to fabricate a story about your daughter's paternity?" Melissa tried to stammer out a response, something about being confused and under pressure, but the judge cut her off. "You deliberately planned to destroy the bond between a father and his daughter through lies. You conspired with your lover to emotionally manipulate your husband into believing he'd raised a child who wasn't his for 15 years, all to get him to voluntarily give up custody. That's not confusion. That's calculated cruelty." The courtroom fell into absolute silence. Judge Morrison continued, "Parental alienation is one of the most serious offenses this court deals with, because the victims are the children caught in the middle of adults' power games. What you did, or tried to do, was destroy a child's image of her father based on lies. That is unacceptable." She struck her gavel. "I'm granting temporary full custody to Mr. Jason. You'll have supervised visits once a week until we complete a full psychological evaluation and hold a final custody hearing." Melissa tried to protest, but her attorney held her back. Jason felt a wave of relief so intense he had to steady himself on the table. Richard squeezed his shoulder in support. Additionally, the judge went on, "I'm issuing a temporary restraining order against Mr. Brad Mitchell. He is not to approach the minor Lily or the family residence under penalty of arrest. The messages submitted indicate he actively participated in this conspiracy." When Jason left the courthouse, Melissa tried to approach him in the parking lot. "Jason, please, we need to talk about this. I know I messed up, but you can't take my daughter away from me." Jason stopped and looked at her. "You tried to take her from me first, Melissa. You lied, manipulated, and conspired to make me believe I had no rights over her. Now you'll reap what you've sown. He got in his car and drove off, leaving her there in tears. The following days were a period of adjustment. Jason moved back home and talked to Lily, who was confused and scared by everything happening around her. He didn't go into detail about her mother's lies but explained that sometimes adults make mistakes and need time to sort things out. Lily asked if her parents were getting divorced, and Jason didn't lie. "Probably, sweetheart. But what won't ever change is how much I love you. You're my daughter, and I'll always be here for you." Meanwhile, the story began leaking into their social circle. Brad, who was married and had 2 children, saw his life fall apart when his wife discovered the messages through the court proceedings. She filed for divorce immediately and made sure all their friends and acquaintances knew exactly why. Brad lost his job when the story reached his company's HR department, which had zero tolerance for unethical behavior. Melissa, meanwhile, became persona non grata in the neighborhood. The mothers of Lily's friends, who had once been close to her, started keeping their distance. The story of how she tried to manipulate her husband by using her daughter as a weapon spread quickly, and no one wanted to associate with someone capable of such cruelty. She tried reaching out to Brad for support, but he blocked her on all social media and changed his number, desperate to salvage what was left of his own life. The final custody hearing took place 2 months later. In the meantime, Lily had been seeing a child psychologist, who prepared a detailed report on the girl's emotional state and preferences. On the day of the hearing, 15-year-old Lily asked to speak privately with the judge. Judge Morrison agreed and listened to what the girl had to say. Lily explained that she discovered the truth through overheard conversations and her own research. She said she was hurt by her mother's attempt to use her as a tool to hurt her father and that she wanted to live with Jason. "My dad has always been there," she told the judge. "He took me to school, helped with homework, came to my performances. He's my real dad, no matter what my mom tried to do." Judge Morrison was visibly moved by the testimony. At the final hearing, the decision was clear. Jason was granted full custody of Lily. Melissa would have supervised visits for 6 months, after which it would be reassessed whether she could have unsupervised visits, but she would never regain primary custody. The division of assets was handled so that Jason kept the house, as it was where Lily lived and the child's stability was the priority. Melissa was ordered to pay child support proportional to her income and cover half of Lily's school and medical expenses. The divorce was finalized 4 months after that fateful Tuesday in November. Jason signed the papers with a mix of sadness over the end of his marriage and relief at closing that toxic chapter of his life. Melissa made one last attempt to apologize, sending him a long letter explaining that she'd panicked when Brad reappeared, that she'd loved him since high school and had been confused, that she never truly meant to hurt Jason or Lily. Jason read the letter once and threw it in the trash. Apologies couldn't change the fact that she'd coldly plotted to destroy the bond between him and his daughter. There was no going back after that. He was moving forward, and Melissa would have to face the consequences of her choices alone. Brad tried to reconnect with Melissa after his own divorce was finalized, but she refused. The romantic fantasy they'd built in their messages had shattered against the brutal reality of the consequences. They'd become painful reminders to each other of everything they'd lost, and staying in touch was too painful. Brad eventually moved to another state, trying to rebuild his life away from the scandal. Jason and Lily established a new routine together. He adjusted his work schedule to be more present, actively participated in her school life, and invested in therapy for both of them to process the trauma in a healthy way. Slowly, the house became a home again, now free of the tension and lies that had filled the final months of the marriage. A year after that life-changing day, Jason was in the audience watching Lily perform in her school play. She shone on stage, confident and happy. When it ended and she ran to him, he hugged her tightly and said, "I'm so proud of you." Lily smiled and replied, "I know, Dad. I always knew." In that moment, Jason realized they hadn't just survived the storm, they'd emerged from it stronger. Melissa, sitting alone in a small apartment across town, scrolled through old photos on her phone, photos of the family she'd destroyed with her own hands. She'd lost everything: her husband, her daughter, her home, her friends, her reputation. All for a romantic fantasy that never had a chance of becoming real. Her supervised visits with Lily were tense and brief, the girl responding in monosyllables and avoiding eye contact. The price of manipulation and cruelty had been far too high. Now, alone with her regrets, Melissa finally understood that some lies are too big to be forgiven, and some betrayals leave wounds too deep to heal. She'd thrown away 15 years of a life built together for an illusion, and now she lived with the consequences of her choices every single day. The lesson had been learned in the most painful way possible: lying about paternity to manipulate emotions and using a child as a pawn in an adult game is a cruelty that inevitably backfires on the one who commits it. Jason, for his part, learned that the truth always finds its way into the light, and that protecting the people we love sometimes means making difficult and painful decisions. He rebuilt his life on a foundation of honesty and genuine love, proving that even in the most devastating circumstances, it's possible to emerge with dignity and create a better future. Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss any updates. See you next time.